Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, and welcome back to The Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and thanks for joining me on this episode of The Catholic Mama, although it's not exactly just my show today because, if you listened to Catechism Fridays last week, you would have heard my husband's voice since I had come down with some kind of illness. And then, I'm glad he was able to do that for me because shortly after he got sick and all the kids got sick, and I think it was the flu. So it has been quite a week here in the household. And as much as I love doing this podcast, I just was unable to record an episode. But that's good news for you guys, because then you get to listen to an episode that I'm going to share with you from my husband's show, the Pat Flynn Show, and a segment of that called Sunday School. This one is called Taking Pascal's Wager. If you are unfamiliar with Pascal, Blaise Pascal was a 17th century French genius, mathematician, Catholic theologian, a 17th century French genius, mathematician, Catholic theologian. He came up with this idea, is it reasonable? Is Christianity or being a Christian reasonable? And is that kind of a bet that you can place? Should you be, if it's reasonable enough, should you be a practicing Christian? So this is a great episode. If anybody is on the fence about, they're not sure, is God real? Is he not? Should they do anything about it? Agnostic types. This would be a good one to share. And also for anybody who is not agnostic and is very firm in their faith, but still likes the idea of knowing that it's reasonable and actually logical to be a Christian and be a practicing Christian. This is also a great one. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. This comes again from my husband's podcast, The Pat Flynn Show. So you get to hear his wonderful voice twice this week. And I will be back. Going to enjoy this one. So enjoy, and don't forget to share, and also go back and listen to some of my husband's episodes. He has a lot and they're all wonderful. The Pat Flynn Show. All right. Thanks so much. Until next time, guys, enjoy this episode.
Ready to become better than most people and most things? Welcome to the Pat Flynn Show. Best-selling author, entrepreneur, fitness expert, and philosopher Pat Flynn teaches you how to learn and become amazing at almost everything through the concept of generalism, acquiring and stacking skills that will help you dominate in business and life. Want to get in shape? Write a book? Be a better precog division officer? Or simply launch a successful business empire? Well, sit back, relax, and listen as Pat and his guests offer digestible and entertaining insights on how to learn the skills, tactics, and strategies you need to pursue your goals and achieve the life you've always wanted.
Folks, welcome back.
Achieve the life you've always wanted.
Folks, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Pat Flynn. I'm really glad to be talking with Dr. Michael Rota today, who has authored one of my new favorite books that has really got me thinking about an argument that I never previously considered, and that is Pascal's Wager. So first off, Dr. Rota, thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
So my admission, or perhaps confession to you, is when I was, and we chatted briefly beforehand, when I was first reconsidering the religious worldview in Christianity, I came across Pascal's Wager, and I had mixed feelings about it. I read some of the different versions, and I read some of the objections, and I kind of sidelined it, and I went, very deep into natural theology and looking at the historical evidence for Christ and all of that, which you outline marvelously in your book. And then I guess what happened is I became so convinced that, but that now having read your book, and like I said before, I wish that somebody presented it to me like you present it in your book 15 years ago, because it probably would have piqued my interest to start reconsidering many of my materialistic and atheistic worldviews a lot sooner than I originally had. And for that, I think it's a really great project, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. So my first question is, what inspired you to want to maybe resuscitate isn't the right word, but reinvigorate or redevelop Pascal's wager in the first place? And also for those who are unfamiliar, maybe a brief overview of what the argument entails.
Okay. Yeah, so Pascal's wager is an argument addressed to a person who thinks Christianity might be true, but they're not sure. Mm-hmm. And in its shortest version, it goes like this. If you have everything to gain and comparatively little to lose by doing something, then you should do it. Mm-hmm. And you have everything to gain and comparatively little to lose by committing your life to God, that is, by living a religious life. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you should commit your life to God. So one reason this argument, I'm interested in it, is this. So you said in your own case, you looked at various arguments for the existence of God and the truth of Christianity, and you found them convincing. So you don't need Pascal's wager, which I can go on to elaborate on. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people aren't in that situation, at least at various times in their life. I mean, it might be that you think there's something more to reality. It's not just all matter and motion. There's some deeper meaning here. But there are a lot of different religious traditions, and smart people disagree. It's hard to know what's true. Mm-hmm. And you might think in that situation, well, then I have to stay neutral and just avoid any religious commitments. That's a mistake in practical reasoning. So here's the idea. There are some things that are so important that you don't want to wait till you have certainty to make a decision. Mm-hmm. And he thinks the situation with God is like this. So he thinks, suppose a person thinks maybe God exists, maybe they don't. Maybe Christianity is true, maybe it's not. I'm pulled in both directions. He thinks this, look, if God does exist, then committing to God will turn out to have been the greatest decision you could have made, because it will make you more likely to become a person who can enjoy eternal friendship with God. Mm-hmm. And it will show gratitude to God, and it will allow you to help other people in the most important way possible. That is, by helping them attain their ultimate end, which is where Pascal has at the time, novel insight. What he says is, even if God doesn't exist, it's not clear that you've lost a whole lot, because you've gained. What have you gained? You've still lived a morally excellent life, or you've tried to. You've lived a life full of meaning and hope. You've lived a life focused on serving others. So these are good things, even if it turns out you were wrong. Let me stop there. But I can, if you want, we can talk about contemporary social science and the way it's kind of backed up Pascal on that last point.
Yeah, I think that that's important. And that was something that obviously Pascal did not have access to. He didn't have the empirical verification of just how healthy and helpful a religious life is in this world. I mean, put aside the next world, but there's real, tangible, practical benefits to of just how healthy and helpful a religious life is in this world. I mean, put aside the next world, but there's real, tangible, practical benefits to living a deeply religious life that we now can solidly attest to through the sciences. And I think that really helps to buffer the argument and increase the stakes as well. Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, let's go into that direction a little bit.
Sure. So maybe the last 30 or 40 years, especially in the U.S., there's been a lot of social science research on the connection between religion and mental and physical health. Mm-hmm. So first of all, it turns out that actively religious people tend to live longer than those who are not actively religious. And the effect is quite strong. Here is a way to think about how large of an effect it is. If you start with a random sample of 2,000 people, mm-hmm. 1,000 of whom are actively religious and 1,000 of whom are not. And then you wait over time until half the sample has died. So you only have 1,000 people left. Mm-hmm. The evidence is that about 525 of those people will be from your religious group, and 475 will be from the non-religious group. Mm-hmm. So it's not a small effect. People who are religious live a little bit longer. Even more importantly, it turns out people who are actively religious have more positive emotions and report greater satisfaction with their lives. Mm-hmm. So let me read you a few quotes there's a political scientist at Harvard named Robert Putnam. He wrote a paper with a sociologist named Chai-Yun Lim. And here's what they say. Scholars who study the connection between religion and subjective well-being appear to agree on a few points. I should say subjective well-satisfaction with one's life as a whole. So they go on. First, most studies find a positive association between religious involvement and individuals' well-being. Second, studies find that the association between religion and subjective well-being is substantial. They cite a few papers, one of which estimates that the gross effects of religious involvement account for 2 to 6% of the variation in subjective well-being. That may not sound very impressive, but listen as they continue. When compared with other correlates of well-being, that is, other things that might be related to one's well-being, religion is less potent than health and loneliness, but it is just as or more potent than education, marital status, social activity, age, gender, and race. Other studies find that religious involvement has an effect comparable to or stronger than income. So you might think, wow, if I were married, I'd be much happier. If I were more educated. So you might think, wow, if I were married, I'd be much happier. If I were more educated, I'd be happier. If I had more social activity, I'd be happier. If I were younger, I'd be happier. Maybe, but actually religious involvement is a stronger variable than any of those. So are we getting too deep into the weeds here?
No, I think this is really good information because, one of the common objections to Pascal's wager is, if I have to live, a religious life, I'll probably be less happy because of all the stuff I have to give up. And the research seems to suggest that the opposite might be true.
It does. And let me say two things about that. First, a few more sort of facts. And then I want to say something about the question of why people might not realize. Mm-hmm. So if you're not religious and you're thinking of trying to imagine your life as a religious person, there's actually reason to think you're probably going to get. They went on. They were just in that last quotation describing other research. They went on and did their own study with recent data. And here's what they found. In an average case, controlling for all other variables, they found 28% of people who attend a service weekly are extremely satisfied with their lives, compared with only 19.6% of those who never attend services. This result is roughly comparable to the difference between someone in good health and another in very good health, or the difference between someone with family income of $10,000 and another with $100,000.
Wow.
Now, as you said, it may not look this way to someone considering their own case. If I'm not a religious person now and I make certain changes in my life, how are my friends going to view that? Am I going to be bored sitting in church? Am I going to be wasting time praying? Is that how church? Am I going to be wasting time praying? Is that how it's going to seem to me? So there's research on a topic called affective forecasting. This is the human ability to think forward into the future and sort of guess how happy or unhappy we will be if some state of affairs occurs. It turns out people are pretty bad at it. In particular, people systematically underestimate their ability to handle challenges. So if you ask people, hey, if your favorite political candidate fails, how will you feel? If you lose your job, how will you feel? If your girlfriend or boyfriend leaves you, how will you feel? And then they take a prediction from the person, and then they actually follow up. And it's very consistent that people overestimate the difficulty of these major life events, and they underestimate their own ability to solve problems and their own ability to solve problems and to find good things that they may not have been able to imagine before they were in the situation.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I can give my N=1 example here is, when I, decided that I was going to become Catholic and start attending church, I did so mostly and purely because of reasons from the head. I just thought it was true. So like, what else was I going to do? But not because I was looking forward to going to church or living a religious life. But now that I've been in it, I can see I was terribly wrong. The practice itself has been deeply rewarding and transformative to me, such that when I was first going, I was like, oh man, I don't really feel like sitting through church, once a week. Now I actively try to get to daily mass because it's just one of the most important and rewarding parts of my life. So I fall right into that category. I was one of those people who just... and I know that sometimes in ethics, this is something too, when people write a will, it's problematic because of the reasons that you just said. Like if they have some type of injury or something, then they might not want to live. But but after that, such a thing actually happens, you realize, oh no, they have just as much, or maybe even a little bit more, or maybe a little bit less in terms of quality of life. So, yeah, fascinating. So what are we to take away from that? Don't always trust our own instincts in that regard.
Yeah, at least when it comes to future difficulties. Yeah. Humans can be fearful.
Mm-hmm. So then, like any argument, right? Pascal's wager, even in the way that, and your development, correct me if I get this wrong, was that if you believe that Christianity has at least a 50% chance of being true, then it is rational and reasonable and responsible to commit to living a religious life.
Say something about the different forms of Pascal's wager. Mm-hmm. Pascal was a philosopher who lived in the 17th century, and he was composing a book, and then he got sick and died. Mm-hmm. And then his friends and family found the notes for that book, a series of fragments. They published the fragments, sort of collected them, arranged them, published them, and the book was Pascal's Pensées, mm-hmm. which means thoughts in French. It's been a bestseller ever since. One of those fragments is a 4-page little essay mm-hmm. that contains Pascal's wager. In that little 4-page fragment, there are 4 different versions of the argument. Mm-hmm. One of the versions, which is sort of the most ambitious, is the version that says, no matter how unlikely you think Christianity is, you should commit to it. If you think there's any... One of the versions, which is sort of the most ambitious, is the version that says, no matter how unlikely you think Christianity is, you should commit to it. If you think there's any non-zero chance it's true. Mm-hmm. Now, that argument has come in for a lot of criticism, and I think rightly. Mm-hmm. People say, for one thing, they say, you need to have more respect for the truth than that. Mm-hmm. And if you really only thought Christianity had a 0.0001% chance of being true, you would be committing to something that you're almost certain is false and opening yourself up to the danger of being deluded by this religion. So there's another argument in the text, though, which is the one where he compares it to a coin flip. And in other parts of the Pensées, he argues that the evidence for Christianity is at least as strong as the evidence against it. That's the argument that I think respects the evidence against it. That's the argument that I think respects truth in the right way. And that's all you need, because in fact, I think there are strong arguments for the existence of God and the truth of Christianity. So what Pascal's wager does is it lowers the bar for all those rational arguments for Christianity. You don't need to be certain that Christianity is true for it to make sense to commit. All you need, I want to argue, is, at least 50%.
And
there, yeah.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would want to emphasize, especially for any people who might be agnostic listeners, is this formulation doesn't say you have to force yourself to believe or assume a fake or false belief. All it's saying is that you just make a commitment to seeking a relationship with God. You make a commitment to living a religious life, which you can do so completely authentically as an agnostic. You can say agnostic prayers, God, if you're there, save my soul if I have. I can't just force myself to believe something I'm unsure about, right?
Exactly. So the target strategy that's being recommended is not pound your fist on the table and make yourself believe. Mm-hmm. It's not even possible. The target strategy is live a certain sort of life. Seek God. What does that involve? It involves praying, which, as you've said, you can even do if you're not sure that God is hearing you. So it involves praying, attending religious services, reading the Bible, associating with religious people, and probably most importantly, living a morally excellent life or striving to. The sort of life that you think, yeah, God, this is how God would want me to live.
Yeah. That's great, and that's such an important and powerful point that I think needs emphasizing. So then, before we get into the arguments, which I think actually help to deal with this objection, it is probably, if not the most common objection, one of the more religions. Well, why Christianity? Why not Hinduism or Islam or Judaism? So how does the wager assess that, or are we somehow missing the point entirely with who the wager applies to?
Right. So the argument that we're talking about, I'm presenting it as an argument in favor of commitment to a Christian life, but someone else could say something very similar about a Jewish life or an Islamic life. Mm-hmm. So the objection is Pascal's wager can't tell you which religion to commit to. And the answer is that's absolutely correct, but that's not what it needs to do. So Pascal's wager doesn't need to tell you which religion to commit to, because there's already sort of a different way to figure that out. You have to look at the evidence. So you have to look at all the available evidence, including your own experiences and sort of publicly available, and ask yourself, which religion do I think is most likely to be true? And then commit to the religion that you think is most likely to be true. When we look at the arguments, I think Christianity is by far has the strongest evidence going for it. So that's why I'm arguing for Christianity. But the wager itself doesn't tell you which religion to take.
Yeah, and that's what I really enjoyed about your book, which is going to be one of my first recommendations in terms of apologetic and philosophy titles, philosophy of religion, because you do a very nice tour of the apologetic landscape. So you state out Pascal's wager, but then you present the evidence. So I think, okay, this is a nice segue. Why don't we go into that now? So Dr. Rhoda, if you don't mind, well, let me just make one quick note that I really appreciated about the arguments you give. And I want to know if this is intentional. This is purely selfish reasons at this point. What I really liked is but then rather trying to argue through the principle of sufficient reason or simplicity or essence and existence, I'm trying to show it's God that way. You actually switch arguments and go to the fine tuning. And I never actually saw that done before. I've seen them used cumulatively, but not patched together. So I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And that's like a really cool shortcut. So I just wanted to say I appreciated that. And that was pretty novel, but we might be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit.
Thanks. Thank you. So yeah, why don't I explain the cosmological argument, and then we can talk about that move with the fine-tuning argument if you'd like.
Yeah, please. Let's do it.
Okay. So the basic idea behind the cosmological argument is this. We look around, there's all this stuff in reality, and yet it seems like it didn't have to be this way. All these things, they didn't have to be here. Something else could have been here, or maybe nothing at all. Mm-hmm. So we wonder, well, why is all this here? Nothing at all. Mm-hmm. So we wonder, well, why is all this here? Why isn't there nothing? And the cosmological argument tries to conclude the best answer to that question is that God exists. Mm-hmm. So how does that argument work? Well, we need 3 pieces of philosophical terminology, and then we can lay it out in 4 steps. The first term is a contingent being, so a contingent thing. This is just a being, so something that exists, but something which doesn't absolutely have to exist in the sense in which 1 + 1 has to equal 2. So I'm a contingent being because I exist, But I didn't have to exist. Reality didn't have to include me. If my parents had never met, reality would not have included me. It turns out everything that we know about is a contingent being. If my parents had never met, reality would not have included me. It turns out everything that we know about is a contingent being. Even electrons, protons, and neutrons, they've been around for 13 billion years, but they came to be very early on after the Big Bang, which means it wasn't absolute. There was a time when they were not. So it wasn't absolutely necessary that reality include them. Okay, so those are contingent beings, the things that we're aware of. They exist, but for any given one, you can say reality didn't have to include that.
Mm-hmm.
The only other type of being there could be would be a necessary being, a being that exists and absolutely has to exist in the strong sense in which 1 + 1 has to equal 2.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is a necessary being, it would have existed no matter which possible route reality had taken. And if there is a necessary being, it would have existed no matter which possible route reality had taken. And if there is at one time a necessary being, it must exist at all later and earlier times. Because what a necessary being is, if there is one, is a being that has to exist in the strongest sense. Okay, we've defined the term necessary being, but that doesn't mean there's anything in reality that is a necessary being. That's what the cosmological argument tries to conclude. The third technical concept is the concept of a causal explanation. So a causal explanation of something is just an explanation that explains why the thing exists rather than not by citing its cause or causes. So the causal explanation of an acorn would cite the oak tree that produced it. The causal explanation of a baby. First key claim in the cosmological argument is this: every contingent being has a causal explanation. Every contingent being has a cause. There are at least 3 reasons to think this is true. One, that's in all our experience, we find that that's true. We've never experienced something that didn't have some cause. Second, if it weren't true, then we should expect things to just pop into existence occasionally. But that's not the case. And aside, sometimes when you read popular presentations of quantum mechanics, you'll hear about particles popping into existence. But when you look more deeply, you see that the theory actually has them emerging out of an underlying field. So it's not actually a violation of the claim that every contingent being has some explanation. Okay, but here is the strongest and most fundamental reason to think that every contingent being has a cause. It goes like this. It's just a basic contingent being like the pen I'm holding. To say that it's contingent is to say that it was possible for it never to have existed. So that means there were 2 possibilities for how reality could be. Imagine them as 2 circles. Mm-hmm. One circle has the pen in it, and the other circle there's no pen. Those were both possible. That's entailed by the definition of a contingent being. So then it's just very natural to think, well, given that the pen actually exists and we're in one of the possibilities and not the other, there's got to be some reason that explains why we're in one of the possibilities and not the other. Might not know what it is, but it didn't just pop into existence without a cause. Okay. Next step in the argument, and we're almost done here. The next step in the argument is to apply the same reasoning to a really big group of contingent beings. Consider this group, all the contingent beings that have ever existed. So imagine we've got a chalkboard in front of us and we draw a big circle. We draw a bunch of dots with arrows between them, representing all the contingent beings that have ever existed in the universe. Mm-hmm. Of course, we can't write them all up. Maybe there's an infinite number. Maybe there's finite. We don't need to figure that out for this argument. Because we can say of that entire group, hey, it might have been that none of those things ever existed. They're all contingent beings. So one possibility is the way the universe actually is. All those contingent beings existed. But another possibility for reality could have been that none of those things existed. So here again, as before, we have 2 possibilities, all this stuff or none of it. And it's just very reasonable to think there's got to be some explanation of why all the stuff existed rather than not at all, because they were both possible. So then, yeah, Pat, do you want to?
No, I love how you're presenting this. I'm going to let you keep going. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can now finish the argument in 4 steps. The first step is just what we've just said, that the entire group of all the contingent beings that have ever existed has some causal explanation. Mm-hmm. Period. Don't know what it is yet. Second step, wait, this causal explanation must involve a necessary being. It can't just involve contingent beings causing things. And why is that? Because if there were no necessary being involved in the causal explanation of this set of all contingent beings, we would have things causing themselves. So if we only had contingent beings in our story about the cause of all the things, we would have one or more contingent beings explaining its own existence and the existence of all the other contingent beings. And that's not possible. That implies that the only way there could be an explanation of all the contingent beings is if there is at least one necessary being that was involved in the production of one or more of those contingent beings. So then we've gotten to this point. Third step, at one time in the past, there was a necessary being. But then the fourth step just points out, remember what we're talking about. A necessary being is a being that absolutely has to exist. And so if there was one at one time, it can't go out of existence, so it's still around. Now, what does this argument show so far? Well, if it's correct, it shows that there's something very different than all the material things that surround us, because they're all contingent and didn't have to be here. So there's something of a very different sort. It's not of a sort that science, physics can tell us about. It's just a different thing. But we've got very good reason to believe that there's at least one of these things. So that's significant. And that's why we might want to talk about the fine-tuning argument.
Yeah, so I really like your presentation there. Very, very well rehearsed. It's almost like you've written a book on that. But again, this was, by the way, this was like the argument when I was first, really seriously considering the God question. It was the contingency argument in various forms of it that ultimately got me. This is definitely correct, and I don't think that it can be coherently escaped, in the sense that if you think that all of reality is just a collection of causes without a cause, that seems to me like you're just saying that all of reality is nothing, right? But all reality is something. So the buck has to stop somewhere. There has to be some bottom floor of reality, some non-contingent necessary ground to explain why anything else exists at all. Now, what you've rightly said is once we establish that, it doesn't nestle particles or information fields or something like that. And then traditionally what people will do is they'll try and take the argument to a second stage, again, through arguments of simplicity or essence or existence. There's many different routes that people can take, which I think is a good thing because it shows the strength of the argument that you can get to the conclusion in many different ways. But you take a very much different route. You almost switch arguments entirely. I'm like, oh, that's really clever because it simplifies a lot of stuff. And makes it a lot more accessible. So did you do that intentionally? I'm just curious what your thought process was behind it.
Yes. So it was intentional. In the philosophical literature on this question, there are a number of approaches, and there's a name for the problem. So people say the cosmological argument has 2 stages, the existence stage and the ID or identification stage. Mm-hmm. So the existence stage is the part we just talked about, an argument for the existence of a necessary being. But then how are you going to ID that? So it was intentional. In the philosophical literature on this question, there are a number of approaches, and there's a name for the problem. So people say the cosmological argument has 2 stages, the existence stage and the ID or identification stage. Mm-hmm. So the existence stage is the part we just talked about, an argument for the existence of a necessary being. But then how are you going to ID that being? Like, what is it? What kind of thing is it? And many of the approaches are very abstract. And so even if they're good arguments, I think some of them are, a person who is inclined to disagree is going to find it easy to pick a premise that's not evident enough. So they might be good arguments, but they won't persuade many people on the fence because they're so abstract. Mm-hmm. if you want to look at such arguments, check out Ed Fazer's. He has a recent book. I think it's 5 Arguments for the Existence of God, something like that.
He was my previous gift. Mm-hmm.
So here's the idea. If what we've argued is correct, there's at least one necessary being that is a cause of the universe and anything that existed before the universe. But here's the thing. In the last 40 years or so, physicists have been amazed to find that there are features of our universe that appear to be just right to allow for life to emerge. So this isn't an argument about evolution. This is an argument that if certain things had been even slightly different, certain things in fundamental physics, then you would never have even had anything but hydrogen and helium. So you never would have had chemistry of any significant complexity. Evolution would never have been able to get started.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the short version of the strongest case of fine-tuning. So the universe appears to be fine-tuned for life. The strongest case has to do with something called the cosmological constant, which it's a physical parameter. You have to go out and measure it. It governs the expansion of space after the Big Bang. It can be measured, so it's a number in a certain set of units. If that number is too small, what you have is a big crunch very soon after the Big Bang. So at the Big Bang, you get, for an unknown reason, all this matter and the expansion of space itself. So it's not just that little bits of matter are like flying away from each other through space. A contemporary understanding is actually that space itself, the space between the bits of matter, is expanding. It's like this. Imagine you have a so it's size of a basketball, and you put with a marker 2 dots on different parts of the surface. They're a certain distance apart. Now you blow up the balloon a bit more, quite a bit more. The dots get further apart, not because the ink marks have moved across the surface of the balloon, but because the balloon space between them has been stretched. So actual 3-dimensional space is apparently like that. That's the absolute consensus of physicists today. And there's this constant, the cosmological constant, which governs how much space expands. If the constant is too small, gravity pulls all the matter back together very soon after the Big Bang, so you have a big crunch. And you don't have time for any sort of life to get started. On the other hand, if the constant is too big and isn't able to coalesce into stars, which happens because of gravity pulling matter together. But if space expands too much, you don't get that. So you have no stars. Turns out all the elements higher than the first 3 they only appear when synthesized in the core of a star. So all the carbon and nitrogen and other elements, oxygen, so essential for life, just wouldn't exist if the cosmological constant were a little too big. Well, what's been amazing to physicists is how narrow the band of possible cosmological constant values is. That is to say, it's like winning a lottery where there were 10 to the 48th tickets and only 1 winning tickets. Mm-hmm. So that's like trillion tickets, and there's just 1 winning ticket. And we seem to be lucky enough to have gotten the one. So then what do you make of that? Well, if there's no God in the picture, so we've got this necessary being that's part of the causal explanation of the universe. That's in our picture already. If we say, yeah, that necessary being doesn't have intelligence, it's not a person, then we would never expect the cosmological constant to have been just right. It's extraordinarily improbable that we're here at all. On the other hand, if the necessary being were an intelligent being, were like the God of traditional theism, then it would not be at all surprising if God had picked the right cosmological constant so as to allow for life. So in sum, the argument goes like this. If the necessary being we've been talking about is an intelligent being, or is God, then the fine-tuning of the universe is not at all surprising or improbable. On the other hand, if the necessary being is not intelligent, then a gigantic unlikely event has occurred. Other things being equal, unlikely event has occurred. Other things being equal, it's more likely that the unlikely event hasn't happened. So this gives you very strong evidence that the necessary being must be intelligent. Otherwise, it's just too much of a coincidence.
Yeah, and what I like about that is it fits so well into the wager too, where we're looking at, okay, what is the best explanation? What is the probability here? And I think that's so useful for people who, especially me, I was always a very skeptical person. Fortunately, I wasn't cynical. I think that's dangerous, but I was a very skeptical person. That, okay, all right, well, we're kind of laying it out like a court case here, and the evidence seems to be quite strong. But then the wager only says, we only need 50%, right? Like, if you just need to think it's at least 50% likely. And I like that because it really helps to lower the expectations and standards of success. Not that I don't think that higher expectations or standards of success people to make the grounds of living a religious life more inviting, so to speak. And that, I think that's a great contribution of your project. Now, we're obviously not going to have time to cover every single objection. I want people to get your book and to know that you deal with, not only do you deal with objections at every stage, but in like a true philosopher, you always deal with the strongest objections as well. So, of course, there's some to the fine-tuning. Not all physicists are running off the church once they discover how eerily coincidental it seems. Some of them, might say that there's a multiverse out there spitting off all these, possibly infinite number of universes, and we just got the right one. So I think that's probably the best objection to the fine tuning, or the best hesitation people have. So maybe just a few quick remarks on that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a great objection to the argument. It's the multiverse objection. The objection says to the fine tuning, or the best hesitation people have. So maybe just a few quick remarks on that, if you don't mind. Sure. Yeah. So this is a great objection to the argument. It's the multiverse objection. The objection says, indeed, if there were just one universe, it's really unlikely that it would have been just right for life. We really can't be atheists and believe in a single universe anymore. But maybe there are many universes. And so many, indeed, that even though a tiny proportion of them are life-permitting, there's still lots of life-permitting universes out there. And, where else would you have expected to find us? If our universe weren't life-permitting, we would have never existed to notice that fact. So the combination of the many universes and what's called an observational selection effect is supposed to provide a competing explanation to so that's a competing explanation. The first thing to notice is none of that. Well, the first thing to notice is this: there's no actual evidence that many universes exist. So what we don't have is someone saying, "Yeah, God's not a good explanation at all of fine tuning." Rather, we have someone saying, "Well, here's another possibility." Okay, that's worth noticing because we don't have any reason. We still have reason, even if the multiverse explanation is correct, we still have reason to say, well, it could be God or it could be the multiverse. And if all we need is 50% for the wager, that might be enough. But there's actually a much stronger reply. So this is not a reply that can easily be given quickly without visual aids. But let me give it a try. And if someone wants to read more, it's in the book. So here's an analogy. Let's say you and I are scientists. Forget about God for the moment. We're studying the universe, and we're trying to figure out if we're in a universe with a certain feature or not. And let's say we've come down to two theories, and we're pretty sure one of the two is true. Theory one says there's a multiverse, and in 1% of the universes, there are red dwarf stars. And the other multiverse theory says there's a multiverse, and there's only red dwarf stars in 1 out of a trillion universes. And we want to know which of these multiverse theories is true. So we go out and we look to see if there are any red dwarf stars. And we find there are red dwarf stars. Have we gained evidence against one of our theories? Yes, absolutely we have. Because one of the theories said that this would be incredibly unlikely that there would be red dwarf stars. And the other one said, well, yeah, it's less likely, but it's way more likely than the other theory. So we can gain evidence about which of two multiverse theories would be correct by looking at the actual world we're in and seeing if it's more to be expected on one of the theories than the other. Next step. Suppose there is a multiverse. Well, that doesn't mean there's no God. Apparently, if God exists, he created many planets. He might have created many universes. Okay, so really what we need to compare is assume there is a multiverse. Compare a theistic multiverse, one created by God, and an atheistic multiverse. That is a multiverse with multiverse is going to have a tiny proportion of universes able to support life. So it's going to be this 1 over 10 to the 48th figure. Only one in very many universes will be life permitting if there's no God. But now let's look back at the theistic multiverse. If God exists, how many of the universes that he made would be life permitting? Well, we have no idea exactly. I mean, who knows? Could be most of them, could be half of them. But here's one thing that seems very true. It's unlikely that it's going to be like 1 in a million or 1 in a trillion. Or put it another way, it's very likely that more of the universes will be life permitting if God's behind the multiverse than if there's no God. Because if there's no God, the proportion is astronomically small. Whereas if there is a God in the picture, then you have a being who would have a reason. For each universe, you'd have a reason to make it produce. We're looking at 2 canvases. No. Maybe I'll use that analogy later. So to sum up the argument, here's the point. If there is a multiverse, but there's no God, then we never should have expected that this universe would be one of the life-permitting ones. Yes, if there is a universe and no God, there's going to be aliens out there somewhere in some universe, but it almost certainly won't be in our universe. We're not going to be the lucky ones. Mm-hmm. So the thought here is that we can only exist in this universe, just like you wouldn't have existed if your parents had never met. There might have been someone else named Pat Flynn, but it wouldn't have been you. Mm-hmm. In the same way, if this universe hadn't been life permitting, it wouldn't have been you and me sitting here. Mm-hmm. So the probability that any given universe is life permitting on the atheistic multiverse theory is extremely low. On the other hand, the chance that any given universe is life permitting on the theistic multiverse, that's not so low, because for any universe that God makes, he'd have some reason to allow it to include life. So just like the multiverse theory that said red dwarf stars are more common was confirmed when we go out and see red dwarf stars, in the same way, the theistic multiverse theory, which predicts that life-permitting universes are more common, that's going to be confirmed when we go out and see that the only universe that we have access to is indeed life-permitting. Mm-hmm. That's more to be expected if God is behind the multiverse.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that, and it reminds me similar. I don't know if I read this. I don't think this was in your book, but maybe you'll remember the philosopher who first presented it. Is that you're in front of a firing squad of 100 people, right? And the guns go off. And you take off the blindfold and you're still alive, right? Well, the fact that you're still alive and observing that you're still alive is certainly not evidence that they're all just terrible marksmen. You would think that there's something of a put-up job going on here, right? And rightfully so. Well, same thing with the if the multiverse is true, then it seems like I like your analogy of red dwarf stars because it's for an example that might even be more pertinent in terms of observation.
Yeah, let me say something about that analogy, which comes from John Leslie, and then Richard Swinburne talks about it. Mm-hmm. So here's the way to transform that analogy to the multiverse case. Imagine a situation where there are millions of firing squads and millions of hapless people about to get shot. Okay, but imagine 2 options. We're not sure we're not sure what these firing squads are like. Option A says the firing squads are all actually composed of friends of the people who are about to be shot, and they're going to intentionally miss. So nobody's going to die, or very, very few people are going to die. The other option is no, these are actually normal firing squads, and they're quite accurate, and almost everybody's going to die. Okay, going to intentionally miss. So nobody's going to die, or very, very few people are going to die. The other option is no, these are actually normal firing squads, and they're quite accurate, and almost everybody's going to die. Okay, now you're in before one of the firing squad. You can't see the other firing squads though, and you're never going to find out what happens with them. So you only have your case to judge from. And the bullets are fired, and lo and behold, you survive. You don't get hit. What should you conclude? Are you in the situation where there were many firing squads all aiming to hit, or in the situation where there were many firing squads but with friendly marksmen? Well, clearly you have evidence that you're in the multiverse with the friendly shooters, and it's the same with the theistic multiverse.
Oh, I like that. I like that one a lot. I haven't heard it presented that way. That's really good. Thank you. So just to take a brief survey, because I think there's one more, and I have some other things to present as well. But if these arguments go through, if they're correct, they not only tell us that God exists, but they give us a certain very particular type of God, don't they? Like, we're not in a polytheistic universe, are we?
Gee, that's a good question, but we have to. I don't have as much to say about that. So here's the deal: what the arguments so far that we've discussed give us evidence to believe is that there is intelligence behind the universe. There is one or more necessary beings with intelligence behind the universe. But we haven't given too much of an argument that there's only one. I mean, we would need additional arguments to show that there's just one necessary being. And Ed Feser does some of that in his book. Yeah, no, that's a whole can of worms that I think we need.
Bypass it. And I think that's a lot of why your book was so intriguing to me is you're able to make the case by skipping steps that might be helpful and might be interesting, useful for people who really want to go deep on the philosophical side, but might not be necessary for most people most of the time. So, for example, like, you're not arguing from metaphysical simplicity to get to a God that is an unrestricted act of understanding, just like Lonergan would do or something like that, which would show that whatever this necessary being is, it's this absolutely simple act of understanding or mind. But that's very technical. That's abstract. You can show intelligence by the fine tuning, which you did. And then maybe we can just get to monotheism by, say, looking at the historical evidence for Christianity. Right?
Yeah. I think that's a good approach because I think the evidence is pretty strong. And furthermore, that makes sense practically because for most people, at least in the U.S., I think the live options are going to be monotheism of some sort, or metaphysical naturalism. It's just matter and space, and when we die, it all goes black. So it makes sense to focus on those two options.
Mm-hmm. So if you wouldn't mind, because we are, the wager is for Christianity. So how do we make that step, right? Okay, it seems like there's something intelligent behind all of reality, but how do we know it's the Christian God? Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here are two thoughts. The first is very brief. When I look at the moral teaching of Jesus, it has a divine ring to it. So it seems to me like the sort of thing that God would teach us. Mm-hmm. So I guess I would put it this way. The moral beauty of Christian doctrine is a clue. Satisfy that test as well. Okay. Second, there's a decent argument regarding the historicity of the resurrection. And this is a huge topic. I know we only have a short time left. Let me give you a super simple version of the argument and then say how recent scholarship has made it stronger. Mm-hmm. So the super simple version of the argument says this. Hey, these early Christians, they said that Jesus rose from the dead. And, they said they'd interacted with him and at length. Either they were just lying for some ulterior motive, or they were deceived. Maybe they were subject to hallucinations or illusions of some sort. Or maybe they were telling the truth. But it's very unlikely that they were lying, because the incentives don't line up. The early Christians would have known that Jesus was crucified, and they would have known that much the same treatment would be in store for them if they proclaimed his teaching. So if they knew it was false, they'd be risking the anger of human beings and the anger of God, right? If they were theists but not Christians. So that wouldn't make any sense to just make it up. Well, maybe they were deluded. Yeah, but wait a second. These were normal, sane people, and normal, sane people, a group of them, for them to all have precisely the same hallucination. I mean, that just seems incredibly unlikely. Third explanation, then, maybe this actually happened, starts to look pretty good. Especially if you already have reason to think that the existence of God is likely, or the existence of God is likely, or at least not unlikely. Because if you've got God, the big objection to the argument I've just given is really from someone who thinks, but we know there's no God, so that couldn't happen. Mm-hmm. Well, if you've got reason to believe in God, or even to think that God probably exists, then of course God could raise someone from the dead. Mm-hmm. And if you've got reason to think that, if God were going to raise someone from the dead, I can see why it might be Jesus. If Jesus really is the Son of God, that's the person he'd want to raise from the dead as a sign that the teaching is true. So, so that's the sort of a simple argument. What makes the argument stronger by more recent scholarship is the minimal facts approach. So here the idea is, let's try to construct that argument, but by relying only on historical facts and biblical scholars agree to, whether atheist, agnostic, or theist. So those minimal facts are three. Let's say Jesus, there was a person, Jesus, who was crucified by the Romans, and he died. Mm-hmm. Second, very soon after his death, certain people started saying or claiming that they had experienced or seen him risen from the dead. And then third, there was this guy, Paul, who, after having been opponent of this new religion, claimed that Jesus had appeared to him, and then he converted. So these are these claims, these historical facts that almost everyone agrees with, weren't the claims that the apostles actually saw Jesus. It was just, the idea was just that they said they saw Jesus, or that Paul said that Jesus had appeared to him. And then people like Michael Licona, who's a theologian, and Gary Habermas, a philosopher, who's a theologian, and Gary Habermas, a philosopher, and William Lane Craig and N.T. Wright have put together arguments to say, well, if we just work with those facts, the best explanation is still going to be that Jesus actually did rise from the dead. Mm-hmm. If we look at the incentives and the likelihood of hallucinations.
Mm. And that's something that rings really true again in my experience is, before I came to believe in God, I just didn't even consider the Jesus question, because I figured whatever it is, I'm sure there's some naturalistic explanation. So I didn't even get my hands dirty with the historical evidence, because I just didn't even think it was worth considering. But then once I became convinced that there is a God, and it's a certain particular type of God that seems suspiciously congruent with the type of God claimed by Christians, then I did look at it. And it's like, okay, what's the probability that something like this would happen if there was no God, versus what's the probability that something like this would happen if there was? And that got me. That was something. And I know Swinburne gives that type of argument, and it's just my perspective, however, completely hinged on that background or prior evidence of belief in God. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that was it for me. And then the evidence is strong enough. It's there that you can absolutely reasonably accept the resurrection if you have that prior background evidence as well.
And in my opinion, there's no other religion that's in a similar situation. So there are miracle claims in many religions, but what makes the resurrection important is that you've got actual people willing to die rather than give up their claim that this happened, and people who would be in a position to know if it happened or not. So this is something unique about Christianity.
So then let's tie it all together here, and then I want to make sure people can know where and how to get your book and keep up with you. So, we're kind of, we've given the brief tour here of the arguments. What is a person to do now? Are they supposed to go back to premise one and think, okay, do I think that sounds like there's at least a 50% chance of it being true? So, imagine you're talking to me. I'm kind of the skeptic, and I was on the fence. What's the next step for me? You're like, I'm open-minded. Maybe I haven't heard these arguments before. It sounds like there's some plausibility there. What should I be doing?
Okay. So, well, here's what Pascal would say, and I think he's right. He would say, you've got to jump in and try living a religious life. Because no matter what we do in human life, we are going to be subject to non-rational influences on our thinking. If nobody I hang around with is religious, and I don't read any religious things, and I don't pray, it's going to, just for entirely non-rational reasons, it's going to be very, very easy for me to never consider the question of God and to continue being non-religious. So no matter what you do, you're going to be subject to certain psychological influences that are going to push you in one direction or another. So Pascal's advice is try something different and live a religious life, and live a devout religious life. So actually try to pray. Find a religious community to participate in that you resonate with. Study intellectual arguments relating. And then Pascal's thought is you will have removed obstacles to seeing the evidence that's there. So his thought is there is evidence that Christianity is true that's out there, but we typically, apart from God, are going to resist it. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do is live a sort of life that is consonant with religious belief. Live a life that doesn't give you a reason to want to hope there is no God. Mm-hmm. And then when you do that, he thinks, then grace will allow you to see that there's actually a lot here, more than you realized, and that it is rational to continue.
Yeah, I think so much of that is, trying to reorient the will and seek and you will find. And all of that deeply and amazingly and profoundly true in my life. That's why I was so excited to such a good job of it that I want to make sure people can dive deeper. So Dr. Rhoda, if you wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes here to tell people a little bit more about your book, the best place to get it, and where they can keep up with any of the work that you're doing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, the book is called Taking Pascal's Wager. You can find it on Amazon easily enough. Rather than following more of my work, I'd want to suggest some other excellent philosophy of religion that's out there. So perhaps the largest single argument against the existence of God is called the argument from evil. If God existed, then there wouldn't be this much suffering. He'd stop it. But there is this much suffering, so God must not exist. Mm-hmm. And there are some excellent things written on that, which is a serious argument. I mean, it's a good argument. It's a good question why God would allow evil. But there's some good answers, too. So I would recommend Eleanor Stump's book, Answers, too. So I would recommend Eleanor Stump's book, Wandering in Darkness, which is a huge tome. And if you get that book, skip straight to the chapter on Abraham and read the chapter on Job. Read the chapter on Job and the chapter on Abraham. She has 4 chapters on biblical narratives. That's the place to start that book. Also, the other book I recommend on the problem of evil is Peter Van Inwagen's book, The Problem of Evil. Mm-hmm. If you want that's technical philosophy. If you want something less technical, C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain is excellent.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage people to check out those resources. And then if you're interested in the fine-tuning argument, Google Luke Barnes, Barnes. Dr. Barnes is a physicist in Australia who does research on galaxy formation and star formation. He is a bona fide physicist.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'll be sure to link all of those in the show notes as well as your book as well. So, Dr. Rhoda, thanks again. This has been a very enriching conversation for me. I loved your book, and I hope everybody gets a chance to pick it up, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
Thanks, Pat.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.